Hi YouTube, it's Kathy, and this is my August 2019 reading wrap-up. If you're not already aware, I do weekly entertainment wrap-ups of everything I read, watch, and listen to, but this is just about the books. This month I participated in Fairy-a-thon, the Diviners Read-Along, Get Graphic, and so many buddy reads. I'm going to start, as always, with the nerdy hardcore stats and charts, and then get into what I read. In August, I read 29 books for a total of 9,181 pages. Why do I keep doing this to myself? That takes into account converting audiobook minutes to pages, so about 3,511 of those pages were actually about 95 hours of audio. The age breakdown for these books is 15 YA books, 10 adult books, and 4 middle grade books. I read 22 novels and 7 graphic novels. This month I read a lot of contemporary and fantasy with some historical fiction, speculative fiction, non-fiction, horror, and a thriller tossed in. If you adjust the genre by page count, not a lot significantly changes. Most of these books, no surprise, came from the library, but I got some from NetGalley, a friend, and purchased some on Kindle. I read 10 paperbacks, 4 hardcovers, 8 audiobooks, and 7 ebooks. Most of my books were in the 300 to 399 pages range, and more than half were published this year. Most of these books were by female authors, and about half of the protagonists were female. In terms of setting, this was another America-centric month, although I did have some reads that focused in other worlds, the UK, Japan, and Ireland. In terms of diversity, I read exactly as many queer books as I did books with no discernible diversity in regards to protagonist. Because I try not to latch onto secondary characters just to scrape in some representation. In terms of star ratings this month, I had 1 2-star book, 5 3-star books, 4 3.5-star books, 12 4-star books, 2 4.5-star books, and 5 5-star books. Let's start with the lowest rated book and work our way up to the highest, shall we? The only problem with starting with my lowest rated book is it's actually the second in a series, and the first in the series was rated significantly higher, so we're just going to talk about both of them together now. This month I read both A Lesson in Thorns and Feast of Sparks as a buddy read with my friend Jean. I will link all of my buddy read peeps down below so you can check out their channels if you haven't already. We decided to do a buddy read of A Lesson in Thorns because she had just received it from a friend and I had just bought it for myself, and then as we were reading it, the second book in the series came out, so we decided to just roll our buddy read right into the second book, and the second book was a kind of a dumpster fire. So the first book I gave 4 stars to. It centers around these 6 characters, and they knew each other when they were kids, and then they all come back as adults to this manor that one of them has inherited because a lot of these characters are fairly wealthy. There's also this mystery surrounding one of their mothers who went missing the summer after they all kind of knew each other and hasn't been seen since. And when they were kids and they were just playing around, they had this fake wedding in this weird chapel in the woods where 2 of the boys married one of the girls, and it turns out that those 2 boys like the one girl and those 2 boys like each other. This is a very adult, sexy, smutty, dark time. There's BDSM in this series. I really enjoyed this first book because it was a lot of build up to actually people having sex, because that's what you would do with the first book. You build up that tension. And Jean and I absolutely loved the first book, and then we went into the second book, and all I knew about the second book was people that I trust had given it 1 or 2 stars. I'm like, something is going to happen that we are going to hate. And yeah, we called it pretty early and we were pretty mad about it. Not only is the big twist at the end very, very anger-inducing because of consent issues just to start with, and then ethical issues outside of that, there were also things that happened within the book that were pretty questionable from consent points and safe sex points, and yeah. We both kind of said that if we continue reading the series, because there's supposed to be another 2 books eventually coming out in the series, it's mostly going to be out of a sense of just wanting to know what's going to happen with that major twist that we hated so much. Because it's not alright, and I just need that character who did a very bad thing to just be kicked out, basically. And then therapy needs to happen for the other characters. That's pretty much all I can say. It's hard to rant about something that is the 2nd or 3rd or 4th in a series because you don't want to give too many things away, especially if people do want to read the book. So I highly recommend reading the first book, but maybe just leave it there, which could be hard because of the whole mystery element. On to my 3-star reads, the first one being Ironside, which is the third in the modern day fairy tales by Holly Black. This basically just needed to finish off this series so we can move on to better things by Holly Black. Again, this being a third in a series, there's not too much I can tell you about it besides this series is set up very strangely. It is just a 3-book series, but you have certain characters in the first book, you have completely different characters in the second book, and then basically you go back to the first characters again in this third book with a little bit of crossover from the second book, making the second book kind of irrelevant. It's not my most favorite thing in the world, but I really do love things set in the Fae world, so that's probably the only reason I got 3 stars. Again, and I don't know why I feel like I need to make this disclaimer every time, 3 stars is not a bad rating. It means I enjoyed it, but it wasn't anything great. And I'm probably making that disclaimer now because the next thing I'm talking about is Monstrous Volume 1, which is beautiful and dark and creepy, which is what I wanted from it, but I didn't really care for the story. Not in that I hated it in any way, but it just wasn't something that grasped my attention. This is something I've been meaning to pick up for a while, and I finally picked it up for Get Graphic, which is a graphic novel readathon that happens over a weekend, so I'm glad that I finally read it, but it's not something that I can rave to you about. It's probably because this is one of those things where you're just thrown into this world and you don't really know too much about it, and then you learn things along the way that you really could have known at the beginning and would have made you enjoy things a little bit more. Next we have From Twinkle with Love. This is the 3rd book I've read by this author, and this is a companion novel to When Dimple Met Rishi. It follows Rishi's brother. No, it doesn't. No, that's Something About Sweetie. I like that one better than this one. I like this author's other works better, and that's probably because I couldn't really handle this protagonist. She was not my favorite. She wasn't a terrible person by any stretch of the imagination, but she was very focused on status. And because she was so focused on that status, she really wanted to date the hot twin. And when 2 people are identical and you're calling one of them the hot twin, it's not really something I'm here for. Basically at this school there's this kind of talent competition. She wants to make films. She ends up making a film with this boy who has a crush on her, who is also the brother of the person that she might be trying to date, so that her best friend will like her again, because she figures if she's more popular, her best friend, who now has some popular friends, will like her again. It's so very high school politics. I really enjoyed the filmmaking aspects. I really enjoyed the actual love interest and not his brother, because his brother I couldn't care less about. But yeah, Twinkle. Not my favorite protagonist. In preparation for my local book club's meeting next month, I read Artemis Fowl by Owen Colfer, and because I listened to it as an audiobook, that's how I figured out how to say this Gaelic name, because Gaelic names are not phonetic to English, so I would have said it wrong, basically is what I'm saying. Artemis Fowl is about a 12-year-old genius who is also a criminal mastermind who is trying to steal gold from the Fae people in Ireland. It's exactly as much fun as it sounds. It's also a little bit dated because it's a little bit older, so the technology described is a little bit dated, but I really enjoyed the Fae technology that we get to see. And then I just enjoyed all the different types of characters and their motivations. It's a fun beginning to a series. I don't know if I'll continue the series, but it is a fun beginning to a series, and I'm a sucker for a Fae story. Finally on my list of 3-star reads is The Wedding Party by Jasmine Guillory, which I buddy read with Madeline from Novel Inc. This is the 3rd in the Wedding Date series, and it was just kind of okay. It's interesting because Madeline and I had very similar feelings of, this book isn't bad, it's just kind of, it's fine. It's nothing spectacular. I did enjoy that it started out very differently from the other books, with these characters just kind of knowing they hate each other but then getting together and then realizing, like, you know, just having sex with each other is kind of fun, but at this arbitrary date we're gonna stop because we don't want to continue doing this. And because they're buttheads, it takes them the whole book to figure out that they actually like each other and all of that stuff. So I appreciate it. It was a different format from the other romances in this series. And yes, I liked these characters, and I liked that the timeline took place over the course of the first 2 books and then a little bit into the future of that. I enjoyed that. Obviously, I enjoyed the cameos from characters that are more heavily featured in the other books. All that being said, it was just kind of fine, and I'm okay with that. On to my 3.5-star reads, the first one being Cheshire Crossing, which is written by Andy Weir, and illustrated by Sarah Anderson in a format that I would have not known was hers if her name was not on the book. So it was very cool to see a different style from her. This is actually something that Andy Weir wrote way before he wrote The Martian and put it up on his website with really bad illustrations because he's not an illustrator. And then once The Martian became popular, people said, we could publish this, but it needs better illustrations. So Sarah Anderson. This is another thing that was just kind of fine. I really liked the premise more than anything. The premise is that Wendy from Peter Pan, Alice from Alice in Wonderland, and it's not good that I can't remember who the last girl was. Oh, Dorothy from Wizard of Oz are all back in our world, and all of their guardians think that they have mental health issues because they all think that they've gone to these fantastical worlds that don't exist. And they have, as we know. So they're all put in this one mental health institute that is masquerading as a boarding school where the people actually believe that they've been to these other worlds and want to study them scientifically. There's fun references to the original books. The little adventure that they go on is kind of fun. The weird thing about this book is it doesn't really know what age category it wants to be for. It's classified as middle grade, but the characters themselves are 16, 17, and they do swear, but it's always asterisked out because it's classified as middle grade. So I don't know, that was a little bit disjointed, but it is kind of fun, and mostly I just really enjoyed the art. On to another book featuring twins. We have The Accidental Beauty Queen. This has Ginny, who is a beauty pageant contestant, and this has Charlotte, who is her twin sister and a children's librarian. She's on vacation in Orlando, which sounds so familiar right now. Seaplanes. Why? Ginny ends up having this allergic reaction to something she eats, and her face swells up, so obviously she can't compete in the pageant, and kind of the ER doctor makes an offhanded comment of like, they could switch places in the pageant, and of course that's what happens. I knew what this is going into it. It was going to be a fun, fluffy time, and it was a fun, fluffy time. There are also a bunch of literary references, obviously being a librarian, that's going to happen. The weirdest thing was that every time there was a Harry Potter reference, the author felt like they had to explain it, as though that's not something that people know. Like, yes, Slytherins are the cunning people. We got it. But who doesn't like a walk a mile in somebody else's high heels type of story? Next we have Technically You Started It. This one is in an interesting format in that it is only done in text messages between two people. That's the entire book. Basically, because of a family rivalry, there are two boys in town who are the same age and they have the exact same name. And one of them texts our protagonist and she thinks she's talking to the other one of them. They start up a flirtationship eventually, they start getting feelings for each other. He seems to realize that she thinks that he is the other one of his name. So he tries to correct that before they kind of meet up. The thing that I really appreciated about this is it is on the page that the girl in this story is demisexual, and she kind of figures out what that means, and that means a lot to me because that is something that I am and definitely didn't figure out until I was probably 30. So the fact that it's something on the page and that teenagers can figure themselves out much earlier if they happen to read this makes me very happy. The last 3.5-star read was Stillhouse Lake by Rachel Kane. This was a thriller. It's about this woman who is the wife of this serial killer and did not know that he was a serial killer until he was caught. However, she was tried as an accessory and acquitted, but people on the internet still seem to believe that she helped him out and are trying to track her and her kids down at all costs. And yeah, send them a lot of death threats and scary things like that. So they are constantly moving, they are constantly changing their identity, and they've settled in this place called Stillhouse Lake, and they think that they're safe, but they probably aren't, as you probably assume, based on the fact that it's a thriller. I enjoyed this. This is the beginning of a series. I don't know if I'll continue this series, but it was a very interesting thriller. I really liked the premise. I really liked all of the social commentary about how misogynist serial killer dealings are. Like, people will talk about wanting to kill her and her family even though she and her family didn't do anything, but in the next breath say like great things about the guy that actually did murder a bunch of people. And I think that social commentary is what elevated this thriller for me. On to our 4-star reads, and if you remember from earlier, there's 12 of them, so buckle in, this is going to be a while. I am trying to get through these fairly quickly just because I don't want this video to be forever, and I have absolutely no way of knowing if future me made that happen because current me is still just like, There are so many more books to talk about. First we have Universal Harvester by John Darnell. John Darnell is the Mountain Goats, which is a band, but he is also a writer. I've read one of his other books before, and from what I remember of it, I remember enjoying it. I remember it being weird, and that kind of explains this book too. I think that's what he writes. Things that are enjoyable, but you don't necessarily feel like you've gotten all of them because they are kind of weird and you feel like you might be missing something. This book takes place in a small town called Nevada, and the main character works at a movie rental store, and some people start returning these VHS tapes that have weird stuff on them, and then it's a whole mystery surrounding how that weird stuff got there and what that weird stuff means. This book was very good at being unsettling and letting you just kind of try to figure out why these characters are doing what they're doing. And just when you think you might have kind of a grasp on what is going on, there'll just be like one or two throwaway sentences that makes you wonder if you missed something previously. And then you'll change into a different section and you'll go through a completely different story that somehow interweaves and comes back to it. I'm also not too proud to say that I have no idea why this book is titled the way it is. I didn't catch the reference if it was a reference within the text. And this is just one of those books where I feel like maybe I would like it more if I understood it a little bit more, but that's kind of my own fault for not comprehending. Next we have some more graphic novels, the first one being The Drawing of the Three House of Cards. This is a graphic novel from the Dark Tower universe, which is a Stephen King book series that I really like. I have a tattoo from it. We can never talk about the movie doesn't exist. This book takes place in the second book in that series, and it's a very cinematic section of that book, so it was very interesting for me to revisit it in this format because I remember picturing quite vividly these scenes when I was reading them ages and ages and ages ago in the original book, so it was very fun to see it in this graphic format. Next we have Maneaters Volume 2. This series takes place in a world where if people with uteruses get their period, they turn into literal man-eating cats, so that's a huge health hazard. As you might imagine, this series has a lot of social commentary, and I'm here for that. I'm also liking the main story, but wish we got more of the main story per volume. There's a significant portion of the books that are taken up by advertisements from this world, and although all of that is very fun and very snarky, I want to see how this main storyline is going. Next I read the Redwall graphic novel. This is a graphic novel based on a book series that I cannot get at my library because it is very old and they don't have it anymore, but apparently a lot of people really enjoyed in their childhood and I just missed out on it. The characters in this story are actually creatures that live around this abbey, specifically mice, but then there's other creatures that they're either fighting, like the rats, or other people that are helping them out, like birds and a weasel and all of that type of thing. I really enjoyed this adventure story. I would actually really enjoy to read the original books as well because they seem like they would have been a lot of fun, but they're not something I can access from my library, so it's very unlikely that I will do that. And my battery's about to die, so I'm gonna switch it out and then keep going because there's still so many books to get through. Next we have Kings, Queens, and Inbetweens. This story is about a girl who has had a crush on one of her best friends for like 3 years, and she's finally going to tell her about it, and it doesn't go the way that she wants, so she kind of feels a distance from this best friend and ends up going to this fair that happens every year in their town and going to this drag show quite unexpectedly, actually befriending this drag queen that I just want as my friend, but then also sees this girl that she has quite an attraction to. This book is about queer culture and drag culture and different people within the culture and the fact that you don't have to be queer to be a drag queen or any of that type of situation. It was fun. There were some cringy moments with this character and them just figuring out who they are and that type of thing, but overall it was a very fun time. Next I read Our Dreams at Dusk Volumes 1 and 2. This is a manga about this boy who has some damning evidence on his phone that he is gay and then has to say that he's not and briefly considers committing suicide, but then finds this found family and it's all about that interaction. The second volume actually follows him with a very specific character, but there's kind of a reveal with that character near the end of the first book, so I don't really want to talk specifically about that character because I don't want to ruin that reveal for the first book. For the most part, this is a slice of life contemporary with one fantastical element that I don't quite get and is never really explained, and I'm just gonna let it do that. That's fine. I don't need to know. Next, for the Booknet Fest Book Club, I read Midsommar Mayhem. This is one of the 2 books. I'm hoping to read the second book before I get to Booknet Fest in, 5 days, so we'll see if that happens. This one is a very loose retelling of A Midsummer Night's Dream by Shakespeare in a very different format that I so much enjoyed. This is an adorable middle grade about this girl that just really loves to bake. She's the youngest in her family, and all the other kids in her family are the best at the things that they do. One is an actor. He's actually in a production of A Midsummer Night's Dream, so that's a fun play within a play situation. This book is very fun to read as somebody who, like everybody else who has done like grade 9 English, has read A Midsummer Night's Dream, because there's different characters that are obviously characters from A Midsummer Night's Dream that are just kind of brought in. But obviously the main character doesn't know that because she doesn't know the play, but she goes to see the play at one point and she starts putting the pieces together. It's a lot of fun. Also, because she's a baker and so much of this book takes place around baking, it made me want to eat all of the things. And I just want people to bake for me because I am not the best baker. Next, I did a buddy read of Don't Date Rosa Santos with Jocelyn from Yogi with a Book and Rebecca from the Tea Hags. And it actually turned out to be very fortunate that we did this buddy read because I will actually be on a panel at Booknet Fest with Nina Moreno, who wrote this book. So I was preparing myself for meeting her without even knowing that that was going to be a thing that would happen. This was actually a reread for Jocelyn because she's already read and loved this book, and both Rebecca and I wanted to read it. This book centers around a girl that lives in a small coastal town, but she never goes to the marina because there's a curse on her family to do with water. Basically, Santos women should not date people with boats. A lot of this book had to do with the community that this small town was. It had a very Stars Hollow vibe, but set by water. And Rosa has been working very hard for the last couple of years to get into a university that has a study abroad program in Havana. Because she's of Cuban descent, she really wants to go to Cuba. Because Jocelyn is also of Cuban descent, it was very fun to read this with her because she could give some insights into that lived experience. And overall, this book is really about relationships. Yes, there is a romantic relationship that happens, but it's a lot to do with familial relationships, friend relationships, community relationships, and then also there happens to be that romance. Only 10 books left. I need more coffee first. I never remember I've put on lipstick until I drink something and this happens. My next book is another book that I read in preparation for Booknet Fest. That is Wicked Saints by Emily Duncan. I will be moderating a panel that Emily Duncan will be on, so I wanted to read her book. There's another author on that panel, but I have already read her book because that author is Taylor, who is a friend of mine, and I've already gushed about her book many times on this channel, so you should definitely read it. Wicked Saints is a dark fantasy about these 2 warring kingdoms. One that believes that magic comes directly from the gods and you have to ask the gods for the use of magic, and they have clerics. And then the other side that uses blood magic. That's exactly what it sounds like. In order to do magic, they have to draw their own blood. So if you have issues around blood or cutting or death, just take all of that under advisement before picking up this book, because I know that blood things are not for everyone. We have 2 point of view characters in this. We have Nadia, who's a cleric, and whereas clerics can usually only talk to one of the gods, she can actually talk to all of them, which is very unusual. On the other side, we have Seraphine, who is the prince of the other kingdom and is also a soldier in the war. This is a very dark, twisted adventure. It is the first in a series, and I'm so mad that the second book is not out because I want to read it immediately, so maybe I just need to befriend Emily while we're on this panel so I can maybe get an arc, because I need to know what happens. There is a lot of magic in these books, and what I really enjoy is the opposing ways that magic is used in these books. I found that very interesting. Next we have Sky Without Stars, which is a retelling of Les Mis set in the future on a different planet. And honestly, if that's not enough to make you want to pick it up, I don't know if I can help you out here. If you're familiar with my channel, you probably know that I don't read a lot of classics. However, as we've already discussed in this channel, I like to prepare for things, and I did a production of Les Miserables when I was 16 years old, and even though I was in the ensemble and the only solo character performance I had was for whore number 1, I still read this entire book. Les Miserables is not a short book, and I read the whole thing when I was 16 in preparation for this show. That's dedication. Sky Without Stars has 3 point of view characters, and a lot of the fun in reading this book is trying to figure out which character is the same as characters from the original. The names tend to be very similar. For example, the Marius character is Marcellus, Cosette is Alouette, and Eponine is something similar. I just can't think of it right now because that character actually goes by a secondary name. She spends a lot of the book pretending to be a boy so she can go through the market without people harassing her. That also plays heavily into her relationship with Marcellus, because for most of it he thinks that she is a boy, so her getting feelings for him and him not getting feelings for her is a whole thing. I really enjoyed this as an adaptation. I have mixed feelings on the fact that it's the first in a series, because I wish I could have just read the whole thing all the way through, but we'll see how the rest of the series goes because I will want to pick it up when it comes out. However, there is one thing I really have to complain about in terms of the audiobook because it just drove me nuts. Because the original book is a French book, there's a lot of French cultural influence in this book, which I absolutely adored. And I can understand borrowing words from French and using them in this text. And if you're going to do that, pronouncing them in French makes sense, especially with words like stupide, which is a word that was used way too much in this text and is ableist, but was just, it's an example. Obviously the French version of that word is spelled differently, so saying it differently makes sense. However, every time this book talked about a meter or a centimeter or a kilometer or a millimeter, they would pronounce meter with a French accent, which is very annoying because that, yes, is a French word, but it is also a word in English. We share the word. If it's a shared word and it's not spelled differently, please don't pronounce it a different way. My theory, which I haven't validated by actually looking up to find out, is that this was directed and produced in America, and America doesn't use the metric system, so it's this whole different thing that it's funny that they're using meters instead of feet. So let's other it further by using a French pronunciation, and as somebody from Canada who uses those words all the time in English, it was so annoying. So yeah, that's my most pedantic rant for this video, I hope. My last 4-star read was A Lesson in Thorns, but we've already talked about it, so let's move on to 4.5-star reads. The first one is If It Makes You Happy by Claire Kahn. This is a book about a girl who every summer she goes to work at her grandmother's restaurant in this very small town, and in that town she actually has a queer platonic partner. I did not know that going into this book. I just knew it was a Claire Kahn book and I really liked Let's Talk About Love, so I was going to read this no matter what the synopsis was, which is why I never read the synopsis. I got very excited about the fact that she has a queer platonic partner because I have a queer platonic partner, and that's not something I've seen on the page before. In fact, that's not even terminology I knew 2 years ago, and when my partner and I found that terminology, we're like, ah, there's a word for what we are. That's cool. Also, I'm sorry, I feel like I'm really overcomplicating the plot of this book, which is not what I'm meaning to do. I really enjoyed the writing, I enjoyed the characters, I enjoyed all of the talking about queer platonic relationships because it's not something I've actually ever seen on the page before. If you're interested in knowing more, just go read this book because it explains it better than I feel like I'm doing right now. My other 4.5-star read was The Diviners by Libba Bray. I was reading this as the read-along that's currently happening, which means that right now we're reading Lair of Dreams, which is the second in the series, so I want to wrap this up so I can continue. This series is set in the 1920s in New York during Prohibition, and lots of creepy things happen is the easiest way to say it. Essentially, there are people called diviners. These are people with different magical abilities, and they vary from person to person, so not every diviner has the same kind of magical ability. And the cool thing about this book is you have so many different characters and you get to know the different types of powers they have, and then eventually some of them meet each other and they all kind of gang up against this one super evil force that was very creepy, and I loved it, and it's so well done in the audiobook, so I'm just very mad that my library doesn't have the audiobook for Lair of Dreams because I need it in my life, but I can't have it, and that's fine. This book is very creepy, very atmospheric. The characters are done with such care. There are so many different characters to keep track of, but at the same time, all of them are so different that it's very easy to keep track of them. It's also interesting that even within this first book, it feels like some of them have gone on such a giant arc, and then from my understanding, other people that haven't really gone on arcs are getting bigger growth arcs in the next few books, and I'm excited to continue the series. On to my 5-star reads. The first one is a reread, and what I always do with my 5-star reads is if I do a reread, it's always at the beginning of my 5 stars, so that something that was a first read has a chance to be my favorite of the month. That being said, for my local book club, I reread Quiet by Susan Cain. I love this book because I didn't really know what an introvert was before I read it. It was kind of something that was glossed over in school when we had that career and personal planning course. It was like a word I had heard before, but nobody fully explained it to me, and it changed my life when I realized I am a hardcore introvert, and that is perfectly acceptable. I just thought I was weird my entire life, and yes, I am kind of weird, but also there are other people like me, and that's totally fine. There was actually a point in this channel before I discovered booktube and committed to it with my whole heart that I actually made videos about being an introvert, so I'll link that playlist down below. Next we have The Darkest Part of the Forest by Holly Black, which is another Fae story that is way, way better than Ironside and all of that. So just read this. One, it's a standalone, so you don't need to read 3 books to get the story, which is a fun, refreshing thing because, as you might notice, I start a lot of series and don't always finish them. And 2, the writing in this book was just way better. This story centers around Hazel, who lives in this small town where everybody knows that there are Fae people and they kind of try to appease them. There's also this horned boy in a glass coffin in the woods, and he's been there for generations. And because it is a small town, there's not much to do, that's kind of the hangout party spot for teenagers. I don't really want to give away any more of the plot than that because I feel like it's something you should go into without too many expectations besides liking it more than Tythe. The writing was way better, the characters were handled more carefully, I really loved the descriptions in this. It was fantastic. I kind of want to get myself a print copy and read it again. Next we have A Very Large Expanse of Sea by Tahira Mafi. I picked this up because Sajed would not stop screaming about it, so I knew it was good. This takes place approximately a year after 9/11 and centers a Muslim girl whose family moves around a lot. Basically her dad, every time they get promoted, they move to different cities, to different schools. So she's basically put up a lot of guards. She tries not to talk to people in these new schools, knowing that 1, it's going to be temporary, and 2, there are a lot of people that say a lot of racist things to her because she happens to wear a hijab. At her most recent school, there's a boy in her biology class that ends up being her lab partner, and he keeps wanting to talk to her, and she doesn't really know why, and it's about her taking down her guard and also, unfortunately, having to teach people about their privilege. There's a part of me that always feels a little bit bad about the 5-star books on these lists because by the time I get to them, I'm just so exhausted that I don't want to talk as much about them as I probably would if I didn't have 28 other books to talk about in this video. So really at this point, all I can hope is that the fact that these books are at the end of this list is a wholehearted endorsement that you should read them. My penultimate book comes out very soon because I just read the arc. It's How to Be Remy Cameron by Julian Winters, and this is a buddy read I did with Cece from Problems of a Book Nerd, which thank you so much for reading this with me, Cece, especially since you were packing to move states at the same time. As you might guess, this book is about Remy Cameron. He's a junior in high school and he has this very important essay that he needs to write, the subject being, who am I? He's putting a lot of pressure on this essay because the teacher it's for could write him a recommendation letter for the school he eventually wants to go to study creative writing, and he figures if he messes this up, then all of his plans for his academic career are just gonna go right down the toilet because he's kind of a mediocre student. That is the basic setup to this book, along with the fact that there are a lot of labels that people apply to him, and basically him going through how these labels affect him and whether or not he enjoys when people just see him as one of those labels. Remy also went through a breakup with a boy a little while ago that was pretty traumatic, so he doesn't want to date, so it's really inconvenient when a cute boy shows up that he could possibly want to date. And the characters in this book, I adored all of the characters. They were written with such care, everybody was so interesting, and this book did a very good job of having very hard-hitting chapters and then immediately going into lighter high school chapters where it's just you having fun with your friends. Transitions between all of these different big topics were just so nice. Julian's writing has also definitely improved. I remember enjoying reading Running with Lions, but I didn't think the writing was the most elevated thing in the world. And not that that's a criteria for me to enjoy a book, because I definitely enjoyed Running with Lions, but I enjoyed this book so much more because the writing was so much better. The one thing, however, that bothered both Cece and I is the fact that Remy wants to be a creative writer, but he doesn't like reading, which makes no sense. But that is a rant I've already gone on actually yesterday in my weekly wrap-up, so if you want to hear more about that, that playlist is always linked down below. And finally, we are on to my favorite book of the month, which is Like a Love Story. This has 3 main characters. One is Reza, who is originally from Iran but is now living in New York. The second is Art, who is the sixth of his name and is a gay activist in New York. And third is Judy, who is Art's best friend and a fashionista. Reza shows up at their high school. Judy ends up having a crush on him. He is not ready to come out of the closet because this is set in 1989. The AIDS epidemic is a major issue. Reza is terrified of getting AIDS. And because there's not a lot of information for the general public at this point, that is just something that is a constant in his life. And he does not want to come out of the closet because he doesn't want his parents to hate him, and he also doesn't want AIDS and doesn't really understand how it works. This is an absolutely fantastic historical fiction. Again, what really made it for me were the different characters in this book. They were just written with such care. There is a lot of heartache in this book because we do run into a lot of characters that have AIDS, and many of which end up dying from it. And I think that it just ends up being a very important part of queer history that not everyone fully knows about, and is something that the community should familiarize itself with. After reading this book, I feel especially privileged that I was not a teen in the 80s, that I didn't come out as queer in the 80s, and that I'm living in a time where if you do happen to get HIV, it is a manageable condition. So like I said earlier with my tirade about my 5-star reads, I don't feel like I'm doing it enough justice, but you should read it. If you want to hear me talk more about these books, or other books for that matter, the playlist for my weekly entertainment wrap-ups is always linked down below. If you've read any of these, please let me know about it down in the comments below. On the way down to the comments, if you hit that subscribe button, that would be very nice of you. You can like and share this as you see fit, and I will see you very soon. Hopefully tomorrow, if editing goes well. Bye!